All right. Let's get seated. We're going to start the last part of the symposium. What did you say? No. You're good to go. Don't get out of here, though. Stay. All right. Okay. First of all, actually, so just to let you know, I'll be giving like a very brief wrap-up, about 10 minutes. And after that, we'll have the panel discussion. And after the panel discussion, we can go and engage with each other a little more over some tea. So first of all, actually, I wanted to thank everybody for being here, for staying all the way to the end and throughout the discussions. It was very engaging. So thank you all. Thank the organizing committees, Saskia, David, Satra, and Carl. Thanks to the past ODEN participants who came back. Thanks to the new ODEN participants, and hopefully as we move forward, we'll have more of you coming back. Thanks to the audio video group and the admins here, and thanks to all the staff in the events team, especially Kendall and Senem. There are a few things that came up, and something that we haven't much touched upon was like how the culture of open science actually needs to be like rooted more deeply in the neuroscience field, and all of us who are here, we are somehow the believers in this, so you're here for that reason. But how do we extend it beyond here? That's definitely something to consider, to find ways to propagate this, and of course low entry barriers would be great because it will motivate more people to come in. There was something also that I think in the design of this workshop and the participants, we tried to basically consider, which was to have a mix of a group of people here, people who are working on tools, people who are building devices for acquisition, people who are modelers, people who are doing experiments. And I think it really needs the whole village to move this forward, because if each of us goes to a separate community and only hangs out over there, it never happens, right? So I think that's essential and important, and one aspect of open science. We talked about a lot of different topics, as I mentioned, but something that maybe we didn't get into as much was, for example, also the diversity of cell types. We know that is necessary also. If we're talking about like multimodal, we need to talk about multi-scaled. Talking about the different sort of circuit motifs that could exist. And hopefully in the future iterations of ODEN, we also will get to discuss all those type of things. One thing that came up was about as we saw, for example, we can narrow our view towards single tasks across many different labs, or having like a sort of single animal we all focused on. But I think it will be good to consider that in the future, perhaps like simpler systems, we can actually tackle simpler systems, maybe, where we can map all the nervous system very quickly, right? So that's also something to consider, like that the experiments shouldn't be only limited to a given domain, and because the behavior is complex, perhaps even like much simpler behavior would be much easier to use to build a foundation models for it, if you're trying to build a foundation model for something, right? And that also brings us to the point that there was this sort of like dichotomy of David's challenge was that how do we differentiate the sort of like mechanistic description that we have for a system versus the sort of like a machine learning description of a system. And I don't think necessarily these two have to be in contrast with each other. They could be integrated. And hopefully that's where our community is trying to go. And to do that, of course, we need to have context. We need to have the context could be the behavior, could be all sorts of measurements, just like like Christoph's talk, not just from the brain, but also from other organs that are interacting with the brain. And we can also think about not just one model as a foundation model for the whole thing, but we can have simple models, more complete models for little bits of it, and then try to figure out how to build the next step. Because I think even if we think we have a lot of data, I think neuroscience is still very data poor, because if you consider the diversity of the neuron types, circuitry, behavior, layers of the cortex, so on and so forth, I think we are actually very data poor. So the idea of let's build a foundation model for the whole brain at this point might be unrealistic. Perhaps it's better to build the small models and then go from there. And of course, to do that, we need some sort of like unifying framework that binds us all together. And that unifying framework could be rooted in, of course, some physical constraints of the system, like connectomics. We saw the recent special issue in Nature that came out 2 days ago, and a lot of Allen scientists were involved in it. I think that's one aspect. And then the other approach would be, but maybe we should also think about different types of frameworks. Like, can we think about like a dynamical framework, an operational framework? There was a workshop that I was at lately at Cosine, which was about compositionality and how do we basically bring different perspective of compositionality when you want to describe a system. And that could be the compositionality at the task level, the compositionality at the representational level, or even more than that. Like, can we go to the compositionality of the motifs of a circuit, right? Like, and that's the kind of approach I'm taking. But I think this sort of things are needed to have a unifying framework, and perhaps something that gives us to have a description of a system for which we have some known variables, but also we have many unknown variables. We have highly nonlinear attributes of the system that even if we do a projection to some sort of like a latent space and so on, so we are actually like missing some of the information there. And that's something I think is really foundational in terms of if you want to have an effective theory of the system, we need to consider these aspects. And I think it was Olivier who was mentioning that if you have, someone said if you have recording from the whole brain, what do you do with it? You still do PCA on it. I think this is a big problem, right? So, in doing so, I think like having sort of like a mix of mechanistic model and the generative model would be perhaps a way to go. And that could lead to a sort of like a new era, perhaps, in science, which is basically we can use the generative model not only for sort of like a completion of like queries and questions about like a given data set, but also beyond that, like using it as a way of building the sort of like a hypothesis generation tool, right? Like hypothesis generation that utilizes all these sort of like informatics infrastructure. Jeremy, for example, was saying, hey, we can run all this sort of analysis on the Dandy data set, and Saskia was telling us about all this like fantastic infrastructure that exists here at Allen, talking about the metadata and so on and so forth at the experimental level, all the way to the pre-processing and so on and so forth. But can we go one level beyond this? Can we actually utilize this to create sort of like a knowledge graph from which we build a sort of like a hypothesis generation that we work with it? It's not that we like let the computer do it, but actually we do something and we refine our hypothesis given the sort of experiments that exist already, even the data sets that already exist. We can know where to go next. And with it also, we can use the sort of generative models to even for data augmentation. Because I think, again, we are dealing with a very data poor sort of like ecosystem. So, but can we do something? Can we generate data for bits and pieces that we haven't seen? Just equivalent to what like AlphaGo did, for example, right? Like they use some sort of like reinforcement learning, and then they let the AlphaGo learn all sorts of new scenarios and play it against itself, right? Like they could find new sort of moves that were never done before by humans. I think that's something to consider. And perhaps this is something, I was talking with Jerome, and Carl was talking about like, maybe OpenScope. Well, we need to do like something about it. Perhaps that's something that we could do in the OpenScope space. Maybe the OpenScope 2.0 or 3.0 could be beyond the community-driven, but actually bringing all these tools together and not only have like one OpenScope, but we could have multiple OpenScopes as this sort of observatories that bring in this idea, and we build this sort of like iterative system to move forward. And this is also interesting because I think I wanted to mention something that like around like 1960s, there was this very cool project in chemistry called Dendral. And I don't know if you know about it or not, but this was a collaboration at Stanford, and it was between Ed Feigenbaum, Carl Djerassi, and Josh Ledberg. And like, one of them won the Nobel Prize in physiology, one Turing Award in computing system. But what they were doing at that time, they were trying to build a sort of expert system for designing new chemistry experiments and then running the experiments automatically and generating hypotheses. This is in 1960s, right? So, and they were very successful in doing it. But of course, that was a much simpler system by comparison to what we have. which is basically, it's very structured, right? So the chemistry, organic chemistry that we're dealing with is much more structured than what we're doing. So if we can do something like that, this sort of like a self-driving lab, that open scope like kind of idea that I was saying, I think this could be a way that really excels us forward. And to do that, we need all of us to basically push forward the sort of open science community, whether at the data generation, at the device development, analysis modules, and so on and so forth, and also the ecosystem that is needed for it. And that kind of leads us to the next session, which I'll ask the panelists, Saskia, Matt Lewis, and Anastasia, to come here to tell us about like what do they envision for the future of what Allen needs here, and what sort of like systems could we have? Like, can we have FROs that take like some parts of these things? Or can we have like, some sort of like a long-term planning, especially now that, NIH and NSF is a little bit like shaky, for example. What do we do about this? So I asked David and Satra, who are part of the committee, to moderate this part. So we'll talk until 4 p.m. And then from 4 to 4:30, we hang out in the atrium. So thank you again. And let's welcome the panelists.
All right, I'm going to kick it off with Anastasia and Matt with the question. You've been hearing about some of the open science and the cool science that's being done. From a programmatic perspective, how do you see your programs or thoughts, or how should programs go forward that kind of engages with a community like this in thinking about open science and ecosystems around data and compute? So I'll give you 5 minutes each to perhaps get us started, and then we'll go on to other topics.
So how do I start this? I think, so let me just give a little background about what we do and what we're trying to do in the Coalition for Aligning Sciences. So we design and implement research programs that are kind of fundamentally team science and open science by default. They're large team initiatives, bringing in experts across different fields of biology to work on very complicated problems like Parkinson's disease and neurodevelopmental disorders. And part of our work has really been, building educational tools, training researchers on how to get started on processes like this. You are all very familiar with how this works, but many in the field are still stuck in a mindset of, I do my lab, I work in my lab alone, and I don't ever really share anything, data upon request kind of things. So I think, we've been recognizing through our work that, collaborating across private funders and with federal agencies is a really important aspect, and we can really punch above our weight in those, and using that kind of approach. And there's an increasing need to really build large, to build tools and infrastructure that is open and available for people to use quickly and easily. This idea of friction is something that's very real. I think, having worked with grantees over the past couple of years now, the resistance to change is real. There's a lot of incentives to not change, unfortunately, and we need to build strong incentives for them to change. So part of what we're doing is trying to work with institutions, actually, at the university level, to change some of the large-scale tenure promotion and recruitment changes at the university level to ensure that these types of practices are encouraged and rewarded internally. But I also think, we really need to think in kind of a long-term way, a big-time plan about how we're going to actually have some longevity to this. It's easy to kind of burn out and do one thing, and then people don't adopt it because there still remains some significant challenges. So for us, we're really trying to bring as many people in as we can, and to try to work together across private and public funders to make some important changes that we see as necessary here. So I'll stop there.
Hi, I'm Anastasia. I am not a neuroscientist, nor do I have a PhD, but I was early with Tim at Neuralink back in the day, and I work closely with E11 Bio, which is doing high-throughput connectomics, and I'm on the board of Forest, which is doing on-chip implantable ultrasound devices. So I have some idea of how neuroscience actually gets built. Convergent Research is a nonprofit that is launching a series of focused research organizations. So these are sufficient time, sufficient scale, say 5-year, $50 million R&D efforts led by a CEO targeting a very specific set of technical milestones. The idea is that if you do a roadmap analysis of a space, so you can do a roadmap analysis, like a landscape analysis, what is missing. You can do a pipeline analysis, what is the data flow and where are bottlenecks. You can figure out what big gaps are. And then I would encourage everyone to be targeting those big gaps. Some of them are poorly shaped for academia. There's a bad dollar to paper ratio. You need real engineers, you need automation, you need to do something more than the time that would be justified to publish a paper. You need to do it over and over and over again to get to scale. It doesn't work well in academic settings. Or it's a bad fit for a for-profit. It's a public good. It's an open data set. It is a tool that will hopefully go back into academia. And in these cases, we've proposed this idea of a focused research organization, which works just like a startup, in that it is a team of engineers and scientists. You know, E11 Bio has a CEO, it has automation experts, it has virologists, it has people working on the antibodies, it has several microscopy experts doing expansion microscopy. We're working on barcoding, and then we have an ML team that is doing all of the segmentation and the proofreading. And so they're all working together with a series of really kind of like concrete quarterly goals towards this outcome of being able to do a mouse brain at the synaptic level in the next 3 or 4 years. Yeah, so we're launching a series of these. We've launched already 10, only 2 are neuroscience, the rest across other areas of biology and physics. And then if I were to say what like the ecosystem needs, is just to maybe take a step back and think about what needs to be built and what's the best way to build it. I'm not saying that FROs are always that, but it's also not always business as usual. And there are many different paths if we're not tied to what we're doing already. We spend a lot of time talking to experts in their field, and we say, gee, what would you do with $50 million? And they all say, more money for my lab. And we're like, okay, I know. But like, if you could do anything you wanted, and you don't have to apply for another grant, and you don't have to hire a postdoc, and you don't have to justify your grad students, what would you do? They say, more money for my lab. And then they walk away. And they like spend a week, and they've never asked themselves this question. And they just didn't have an answer because they don't think about the world this way. And so then they come back and they're like, actually, this is the data set that like we need to change, or this is the policy program I would work on. And I think that people should be encouraged to think about what would fundamentally change the field, or what would be impactful for humans. What are the things we should be building?
Thank you. I'm going to take that $50 million and pass that on to Saskia and say, if you had $50 million in the context of, and you are still a scientist, and you're spanning a lot of different domains, going from thinking about platforms, you talked about metadata and systems, and you're seeing the span from designing, thinking about an experiment, all the way to getting data out to the world. What would you do with those $50 million? Would you continue to do the same thing or do something else?
I mean, I can't just run. No, I mean, would I do the same thing? I mean, I guess, but maybe at a different scale, right? Like at the same core principle and goal, I think, would still hold, of really wanting to have strong infrastructure that makes it easy for scientists to focus on their science, right? Like in many ways, this is my goal: is that neuroscientists can focus on neuroscience and not on data science. But to do that in a context where we don't ignore the fact that we are in a data-centric field, and to really make it possible for more people to be able to participate in that process. And so, I mean, I would really be investing that into how we strengthen our ability to share and communicate and collaborate. And so it would be a lot about infrastructure and building those tools that support that type of collaboration on infrastructure.
So By the way, I should say you should have the microphones around, so anybody who has a question out there, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. I'm going to ask David a question, kind of following up on this, which is, you've built layers for various, you've built it at a company and you've built it at Allen Institute. How do you see the world which keeps rebuilding various things come together? Where do you think that the variance in infrastructure is a useful thing? And where do you think we need to reduce that variance and improve interfaces in the things we do?
Let's see. So I think when I talk to Carell, oftentimes the mantra is fix the problem at its source, right? So if you can fix it in acquisition, fix it in acquisition. If you need to fix it in processing, fix it in processing, right? And I strongly agree with that. So there's a tree of things that happens once a piece of data is collected, right? And that goes through potentially a variety of processing, feature extraction methods, and then analysis is often a wild west. I would prefer standardization closer to the source, right? And for example, like how can we, it's less about standardization and just making sure that everything that is learned in a lab to calibrate their lasers or run kilosort, like that knowledge is transferred effectively. That's often like materialized in code, right? Like this is how we learned how to handle this problem that we discovered when we sorted this kind of a unit in this brain region, right? But that information is only ever shared at the publication, right? So I find that irritatingly slow. Like so a lot of the infrastructure we talk about is really about dissemination of understanding of how to use the tools that exist. Well, we just want it to go faster, right? So the simple thing that you talk about, we talked about last night. Somebody wrote some code, but we usually keep the repositories private until we're happy with them. Right? There's an active movement, like public GitHub repositories are okay. Right, that's okay. I would like that to be true of data as well. That is not true of data right now, and there's technical reasons why that's not the case. But there's really social ones too, and I'd like that to change. Anyway, so you're talking about layers. The most important thing for me is that we as a community need to really take seriously reusing things that already exist because of all of the implicit knowledge that has gone into creating those things. One time I pitched to Carl rebuilding something and he said, you have no idea how many millions of dollars we spent on that thing just to make it work, right? You're not going to do that again rapidly. And he's right, you know, to be clear. There's a little mantra I have that's going around the building. It's like, wow, that thing does 9 out of the 10 things that I want. I guess I need to build a new one. Like, well, maybe, right? Or maybe you can reach out to the people that developed and see if they're interested in your contributions, right? And the answer might be no. But I think oftentimes we as a community right now stop before we even try, right? Hey, the people at Ants, man, if they just supported saving to Czar, like, well, did we ask them? I don't know, right? I didn't. But stuff like that, we need more things like that. And I think that creates more opportunities for collaboration, right? Not just around the tools, but at a human level. Now, I know the people who maintain Ants. I should talk with them more. But like now I know these people and I have a line of communication with them. So anyway, I'm trying to mix the topics of tools and also social structures and how we talk with each other.
Thank you. I heard the word kind of getting information out there as early as possible, where information could be your GitHub repo or could be data, could be a publication. In the publication space, the community has moved towards preprints, something that was done by the physics community for about 40 years now, has eventually hit the neuroscience community. And I remember Carl, when he's opened the consortium, I think, or opened the workshop, he used the term systems neuroscience is a nascent field. We have a nascent field in systems neuroscience, and there have been many talks today and yesterday and day before on the world of deep learning, the third resurgence of AI, which should be by definition even more nascent than systems neuroscience. As we are dealing with this set of nascent fields that are evolving, that are figuring out differences along the way, where do you think, again, programmatic roles can be? Is it around focus on reducing the variance in knowledge or reducing what it takes to do science? The tools and technologies that come, should there be targeted efforts? The Brain Initiative did some of this to say we need a technology to do cell types in single cells. And they went after it. Where do you see the balance between a focused, targeted project to get at something versus the broader space we need to understand things across species? How do you see that playing out? Maybe for folks who are looking at programs, I'll start on that end again.
So Convergent Research is a nonprofit, and we run 2 to 3 programs a year, and we're selecting them, not just in neuroscience. I think that we have this notion of technologies or programs that are close to the trunk of the tech tree. Things where if you create a technology or a tool, it actually enables all of that down the line understanding. If actually you're able to get data reliably through many, many more patients, actually that enables that discovery science. And so I think that these things kind of go hand in hand. And so maybe you can pick the tools that would best enable the advances you want to have, and then make sure that academia and university research is still well supported to do the learning that comes from those tools.
Is it all right if I follow up on that? Yeah, I just want to I want to kind of echo that a bit. I don't think that it's an either or. I think they both have to happen. And I think the thing I want to avoid in systems neuroscience is, in my lab, I'm asking a question with this random behavior that I came up with for some random cell type that I don't even know what it is, in a structure of the brain that I think is this structure, but I don't have a good way of knowing exactly where I am in the brain. And in David's lab, he's asking about a different behavior that he made up with a different cell type that may or may not be the same cell type as mine, in maybe the same brain region, right? Like if we don't have a way to actually bridge these things together, we're just all kind of playing our own games by ourselves. And we might publish some fun papers, we might see some interesting things, but it's really hard to to come back to what Nima was saying earlier. It's really hard to start to pull that together into a knowledge base because they're just kind of all random. And so in order to be able to allow people to ask questions that are the burning questions that they are excited about, but to do that in a way that builds towards a fuller, more complete knowledge of what we're doing, we have to have some of those resource projects, some of those big efforts to come up with the cell type taxonomy, come up with atlases across different species and across evolution. And so it's really not an either or, but it's that the two of them kind of make both of them necessary.
In that space, maybe I'll get to this notion that we are pulling back the layers. I think when you were talking about publications used to happen, data depositions used to happen, code depositions used to happen. We are saying bring that earlier and earlier in the process. In various fields, there's a notion of co-design that goes on largely in many of the things we do. It's co-design within a lab, not necessarily across projects and labs. From a programmatic perspective, maybe I'll ask Matt this. As you fund programs, is there an element of thinking about co-design across individual programs that are funded, or are you targeting primarily orthogonal spaces that have no notion of perhaps co-designing the science that they will do or the technology that they will develop?
Yeah, we definitely think about co-design, but one of the biggest things that we spend a lot of time on recently is getting collaborators, getting people together to begin to get to know each other and feel comfortable doing these things that we're asking, sharing data early, sharing code early, and co-designing protocols. Thinking about how, if we together work on something with a shared approach, how much more can we do than if we did this individually or, lab by lab, right? And it's much harder to make anything to work together at the end when everything's done and no one really agrees on anything anymore. But if you can get them there to get them together early, it's, I think, extremely impactful. So this is something that we've been doing within our Parkinson's work. It's something that we're starting to do with our autism work. It's something that we think is, it's a huge focus for us. And I think it requires time to build buy-in, of course, but I think people quickly see the benefits of working together early and designing projects together and feeling more comfortable with this process. Because you're right, there's a huge inertia to keep things private, and it sets us back, and I think it's a huge problem for the success of our programs and for the furthering of science and discovery.
Thanks, Matt. Eric had his hand up.
I wanted to ask the panelists, and specifically Anastasia and Saskia, as well as other colleagues, how you see models and indeed even theoretical or mathematical tool sets and progress fitting into the frameworks that you're describing. I'm thinking about Saskia's lamenting of individual labs perhaps developing random, as you said it, or idiosyncratic answers to questions without a clear relationship, perhaps to Anastasia's trunk of a tree of knowledge or whatever develop, and so should models and sort of theoretical concepts be organized into giant picture questions that people are working on, and if so, what if any software engineering or other platform-based technologies do we have that could help us on the theory and mathematical end to be full participants in this sort of more modern age of collaborative work?
I'll let you answer the model question. But on the software question, I think that a lot of things are developed in labs for their lab, and maybe people borrow it. But you can build nonprofits just to build a single set of tools, or you could build a for-profit company to build a set of tools and then sell it at reasonable prices. There are like different ways to build the expertise in the engineering into the model, even beyond open source projects. So we have an open source project called Lean, which is an open source language for formal math. DeepMind just used it in its silver medal winning project recently, that has a small nonprofit supporting the core development work, and then the rest of the open source community comes in. And so they've been funded for 3 to 5 years to build that core library, and then everyone else is building the libraries and the different pieces on top of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm quite the expert to answer this question about models, but I mean, I guess I think of it very similarly to the way I think about data or tools or software tools, right? That I think it needs to both be documented and live in a place that other people are able to find it and know what it is and kind of what it's for and how to use it. And so I think, there's things like Hugging Face and other types of repositories for models and ways to document them and evaluate them and put benchmarks around them that I think can be, I think, an important piece of this, so that it's not, again, as you said, it's not my favorite model versus somebody else's favorite model, but that there can be a communication around those resources, and that there can then be that open source development as needed by the users, I think. So I think that it fits into that same framework, that same way of thinking is kind of, yeah.
I'm going to piggyback on the word benchmark, because the other word that's often associated with this is challenges. And I'd love for people in the audience to think about what kinds of challenges we could run. But the question I have here for the panel is, we have seen a lot of challenges in many fields, including neuroscience. There are some. How useful do you think challenges are in coalescing scientific thought processes in a field, or to standardize? I see Saskia pass that microphone on, so I'll let David.
Okay, challenges. I think challenges are a great idea. They're a form of like really focused analysis that also have the benefit of creating a community of people that, in this case, are competing with each other usually, but it's still fun, right? But I think one of the huge pieces of value that come from something like a challenge is it creates a demand for standardization of the inputs, right? So what goes into making a challenge is a heck of a lot of work to make sure that like the data loader is there and you understand the metadata, right? And if you can create the sort of flywheel of people analyzing and trying to get up the leaderboard, then that creates a value structure around the standardization of the data. And I think we're just trying to go from the other end up, right? We don't have a challenge, but we're thinking about challenges right now, actually. But like, what do we need to get in place so that any piece of data we collect is ready and easily loadable into the types of models people described here and Eric was just talking about? Right. And I think, sorry, it's like days since David talked about metadata, but I think a lot of it boils down to extremely transparent descriptions of data. And, we're in a hard space in neuroscience because everything's changing all the time and the hardware is changing all the time and the experimental design is changing. We lack context, right? But right now, I think we need to do much better about describing that context, even in the sort of model context protocol sense.
Anybody else wants to take on challenges about challenges?
One thing that we're reckoning with in our work, in our research, is the number of types of different models and software to do behavioral phenotyping. And this is something that is like each grant round, there's another one proposed, and then each time there's another kind of explanation for why this is the best. And there's not enough, I think, hard data comparing them. And it's something that I think we would be interested in potentially helping carry out, is because we have, many of our grantees are using these, and for good reason. But it's eventually we need to maybe think, should we switch from just using myriad numbers of these, but then instead finding the best one, and having a good reason to choose one over the other. So I think it would be very interesting to maybe use behavioral phenotyping as an option, or maybe some types of image processing as well, especially for the neuropathological world, trying to better understand how we can easily analyze large amounts of postmortem human brain or preclinical animal model tissue.
I obviously love institutional models, but prizes, challenges are great pull mechanisms, and I think that we have a lot of push mechanisms out there. We fund labs and they do stuff and they put it out, so it's fun to have coordination methods or things outside, and I think they complement each other really well. Again, I would, rather than say challenges generally, but what change do you want to see in the field? What needs to happen? And if you can describe that change, and then you look at your different models, challenges are good for some of those.
I'm looking up to see if there are any questions. Carl.
I mean, I think this is incredibly important also for technology development. I think I've seen a lot of money wasted by not having good benchmarks. For example, if you want to develop a better sensor for something, folks can still write grants and publish papers without any benchmarking. And they're just saying, look, here, this is great. I can see this here. I can't see it with something else. No side-by-side comparison. This is the rule rather than the exception. Same for electrode technology. I think it really holds the field back. This is actually a much bigger issue, I think, than you touch on many important aspects, but it really is very important technology development, often across the board. On the other hand, you have to make sure that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? It might, your next behavior tracking algorithm might look very similar to the previous one, to the untrained eye, but perhaps that extra little tweak, right, will require much less training data. So the benchmarks have to sort of really hit the right spots, right? And so it's not trivial to do good benchmarking, but super important in my opinion.
I think just one thing I'll add in addition to all these things is that another place that I see that challenges can be really vital is that they can focus attention for people with very particular skill sets or particular interests, and can break down some of the challenges that we need to solve into those particular pieces. And so I think oftentimes when we can talk about our data and our tools and all the things that we're doing, and people feel like they need to either take the final product or they have to understand all of the pieces. And we can have challenges that focus on particular things that we have to deal with in terms of image processing, or creating better analyses and data processing methods, in addition to answering particular scientific questions. But by allowing people to focus in and see that there's opportunities that they maybe aren't a neuroscientist who understands the behavioral or the neural context, but they are somebody who works very closely with a lot of image data, and so they can throw their computer vision algorithms to a problem that they haven't yet considered because they've just never known that these data are there and that people are grappling with these things.
Challenges require data, often. At least some do. And data information is getting noisier by the minute. So on one hand, we are saying put things out there early, but we also kind of need a filtering system. In some ways, this workshop is a little bit of a filtering system. We hear cool tools, contextualize and where they were used. Some of it comes when we read papers, but I think I made a list of a whole bunch of things over the last 3 days that I need to go up and follow up on and look at. How do you see the space of resource mention and usage coming together in the future? It still seems like, I'll say this, we run a hackathon before the Human Brain Mapping Conference. And one of the things I was asked to do in years past was to get up there for 5 minutes, just turn on my browser and show cool things that I have come across as a set of technologies. Now, internet communication has increased since when we are doing this, but it still remains the space that we don't get to hear of the most relevant thing very quickly. And in the space of bubbling out everything that's out there, whether it's preprints, whether it's code, whether it's data, it comes with all the good, bad, and ugly. How do you see a space of reducing the noise in the system of communication? And is there a plan for at least any institutions, right? We have 3 institutions, in how to do that. Now, there are models which go back to the extreme end of we will only publish when things are curated and clear. But that has a downside. On the flip side, if everything is put out there, there's a lot to go through in terms of filtering and relevance. How do we balance this spectrum? Or how do you think we should balance the spectrum?
I mean, if it's not clear, I skew towards the slightly noisier end and much prefer transparency. This one, I'll give you an example, like the Saskia showed earlier today. Everything's up, everything's public, and we have 40,000 of whatever records in our database, right? And if you ask a scientist that works here, how do you find your data? They kind of grimace, right? Because it's not like it used to be when they were in grad school. There was my folder. I had my folder. I knew how to find my folder, and I knew how my folder was organized, right? I think the only solution that I have for this has to be like extremely transparent metadata. So minutes, since I said the word metadata, extremely transparent metadata. And I'm kind of optimistic about language models in this space right now. You saw when Saskia showed demos of the chatbot, aside from it being a little bit slow right now, it's like extremely effective at finding things with fuzzy language. So in the same way, Google did this for search, right? So I'm optimistic about this. I'm optimistic about having prompted agents go wander the internet and find stuff for you and curating it for you if you give it good prompts. So I think there's a solution here. But it all hinges on rich descriptions of the thing that you're looking for in natural language or in at least machine interpretable language, which is rapidly approaching natural language. And so for me, the existential problem that we have is metadata capture. That's how Saskia ended her talk, I think. Like, how do we effectively make it very easy for people to describe the data that they're producing? And that's, to me, an unsolved problem and kind of scary.
I have one other is that we trust people, we trust their taste. I think that large language models aren't just getting very good at research, but also we have a community of experts, and there are ways that other communities of experts share information. You know, Alexi Guzzi, if you're on Twitter, publishes the best of Twitter every week, but best of X every week, and it is a way to share information from a curated source. I think that that is in academia on some sort of like regular publication scale, which is not necessarily as fast as you would like that feedback. So you can decide that you are going to write a Substack, and you're going to like curate things that you think are interesting and share them to peers that you think are interesting. If you guys can't tell, I really like entrepreneurship and everyone deciding to do new things. Or I've seen people building platforms where you put papers in and then you rate what you think of those papers, and then people rate what they think of you. And so it just like, not publicly, but it like weights like, oh, this person has good taste, these are good things, I'm gonna go and select towards that. And so there are like ways and systems that we can build on top of it. I think a lot hinges on how we think of publications in general.
I think, Satra, part of the challenge to the question that you're asking is that most of what we've talked about in the last few days is from the perspective of how to share data, how to share code. We've made this tool, here's the QR, go find the GitHub, you can try it yourself. And open science, there's the other side of this coin that I don't think we've actually heard enough about in the last couple of days, which is how do we use tools? And I think there's a lot of, we can talk both about the challenges of sharing, because I think there's an undue burden on data generators to do that extra work to share their data, likewise with tools and code. But until we like really spend a lot of energy talking about what does it look like to find data and reuse it, and how do we actually work that into our research programs, like we're just going to keep talking about when I put all of these other things out there, and it's a little like the chaos in the brickyard analogy of we might just be throwing a lot of bricks out there and not actually using them to build anything. And so I do think that we have to think about what does it look like for people to actually use open source tools in this type of collaborative way. And here at the Allen, we've put out a lot of resources and people do reuse them. But a lot of that is because we spend a lot of time going and telling people about the data, showing them how to use it, putting the tools in their hands, learning about the things that they struggle with so that we can improve those tools, and do a lot. We have entire teams that are about education and outreach that are about trying to think about how to get more people engaged. And that can't scale for every person that's trying to share their data responsibly. And so I do think there is something that needs to be done on a cultural level, on an educational level, to start thinking about how does reuse come into our research programs. Maybe not as a solo thing, but how do we build that to make our programs go further, and not just have open science be that we're putting things out there and maybe somebody will pick it up someday and maybe do something, but who knows?
Just actually alluding to your point about like this sort of like scaling up, I think this is perhaps where having like focused research organizations could be like really useful. If, for example, Alan says, well, you know what, we're doing our science, we're generating all these data sets, but we also have these lot of sets of like, tools, whether it's like experimental tools or algorithms or, data infrastructure background of it, right? Maybe if you guys can like list these things, I'd like, hey community, these are these things. If you can come pick it up and scale it up, we can go to the next level, right? I think this would be actually a great service beyond what Alan is doing actually. Alan has been a pioneer in open science in that direction, right? But let's say Connectome, right? So Connectome, we heard a bunch of talks about Connectome, but what is the actual cost of doing a Connectome in an experiment to doing something cool that now becomes a routine that you don't have to use like one atlas that was used like, 6 years ago, for example, something like that, right? Like, E11 Bio is trying to do something in that direction, right? Like, and do you guys have something like that to basically say, hey, give us a set of, input space of what ideas you have, and we can mix and match them, try to see like what is actually the challenging piece in academia or, in institutes that we can pick up and, form FROs, for example.
We're actively looking for new projects, and often through this sort of what are the gaps and what are the biggest the problems that new tools or data sets could solve. and then the points to scale them to a sufficient level that, as A11 is an example, hopefully is significantly cheaper to build a synaptic map. We already have a lot of, they've been going for 2.5 years. We have really amazing progress. And so in 3 or 4 years, hopefully it's a technology that we turn around and we're like, great, you want to do this? We can do this over and over again with disease brains, with non-disease brains. And we're building a tool that then everyone can use and then it's shared in the same way. And we are actively looking for new projects that are FRO shaped.
I think it's related questions to some of the discussion. I believe we are building an ecosystem here, an ecosystem of tools, data, and models, and people. And so I'm curious in if you forward in a year and we meet again at Odin 2026, what would you like to see done, like in that ecosystem?
Before I ask people to answer that question, Jerome, do you want to talk a little bit about the OpenScope project and how that relates to an ecosystem?
I mean, I think we are, Nima pointed out, I'm thankful for his support. We are building a piece of that ecosystem, I think, so to bring people together to create projects that we execute and push it here. And I feel like a lot of these pieces interact with a lot of things that people are building here. And so I'm curious, where do you think we should put intent in the next year? What are the things we should focus on to build? Is it what is the part of Dandy that you would like to see improve next year? Yeah. Yeah. So we're running project that is submitted by the community. Outside scientific interest.
Maybe I'll take that on to start with. From a technology perspective, I'll repeat 2 words that have been said on the panel: metadata and friction. I think that's the biggest bang for the buck one can get right now, which is the technologies are coming in place to get that and acquire that right at the point of data acquisition. And that has so many downstream effects that if we can solve that problem in a year, we would be in a very different place. And this is not generating new ontologies, new terminologies. This is not generating a new standard, new format. This is taking the technologies we have and making that process at the point of acquisition so much easier and frictionless, hopefully frictionless, that many downstream things then rely on it, including foundation models and language models that could use it. So I would start there as what I'd like to see in the next year from a technological perspective.
Let's see. Two things, metadata and friction. I won't repeat the metadata one. The friction I will point out is, like, I think we as a community are completely valuing the difficulty of data movement as a barrier to collaboration. Like, a lot of the stuff we do around cloud is primarily around minimizing how many times you need to copy data from place to place. You know, I went to a meeting last year at CCI on, like, how do we do large-scale imaging? And everybody there just threw up their hands and said, we don't actually know how to manage this data, but we sure are good at collecting it. Right, like that's a problem. I just a few weeks ago was talking to somebody like, hey, did you manage to get that data from the East Coast yet? And the answer was yes, but it took us about 6 months. Like, that's ridiculous, and that kills collaborations, right? So I think we need to reckon with our ability to manage data at this size and interact with each other around this data. Let's see, and another KPR we could put on this meeting for next year is, hey, in the acknowledgement slides, it would be cool to see, like, more cross-institutional collaborations, more logos on the slides, right? Like, are we collaborating with each other? Do you want to expand that acronym? I'm sorry, do people know what KPRs are? This is business jargon. This is key performance indicators. KPIs. The other one is OKRs. I mixed them together. I'm sorry.
I'm going to ask a pretty controversial question. So, are you afraid that people are not going to go through the mountain of metadata which is generated to find what are going to be some of the salient points? Let me give you a very specific example. For example, in our synaptic physiology data set, chloride concentration is different than what is in vivo. And I have been talking to many people who use the data directly without necessarily checking for that. There is a mountain of metadata with all the genetic lines, with all the positions where it is, and there is one bit of information which is in there, which is a big flag where people should be care about, and they don't. How is it possible to do and look for something which is going to be careful? That is the important one, and here are 10 megabytes of metadata, which is meh. Can you tackle that?
Do I worry about this? Yes. Does it prevent me from sleeping? No. I mean, I think that you're right. This is absolutely going to happen. This happens right now in a lot of different ways in the way that people are using data. Right. I want spiking neurons. There was one. There was a hackathon once, and I was comparing some property of spiking neurons, and they took two different data sets, one from a mouse, one from a monkey, and the mouse was our data, and so I knew the way that the QC was done on that, and that they hadn't selected for the QC'd units, whereas the monkey one was the data that went into the paper that had been finely curated, and they were reporting these big differences that really just amounted to, but you didn't actually filter out the not good sorted units, right? People miss these things all the time, and so is this something we need to be concerned about? Absolutely. There has to be a lot of education about what the data are, what the modalities are, what these techniques do, and how to use them and interact with them. And there are situations where those details don't matter. And so how do we help scientists understand when they're in a situation where they need to pay attention to these details, and how do they find those details? I mean, these are things that absolutely need to be solved, and I think we need to be doing it. But does that mean we shouldn't have the metadata out there? No. And does it mean that we shouldn't encourage people to be using these things? Also no. I mean, this is also a little bit like if we can get AI to generate do a lot of the analysis for us, it's going to do a lot of bad, dumb analysis. But we need to also have systems to see when people are making these kinds of common mistakes, so that we can kind of flag that, and as a community in the field, be able to appropriately kind of review this work. Sorry, I had a soapbox apparently.
Thanks for sitting on the panel. I have a question about sort of the academic culture and incentives, which are often not really aligned with many of the themes that we're talking about in this conference, right? The things that we know matter about curation, about metadata, about tool building, about process, are not really things that, one, are taught at the academic level for whatever reason, and two, are not really valued in a lot of academic spaces. They're not part of the evaluation process. They're not things that are highly publicized or focused in on papers. They're not part of usual promotion evaluation considerations. What are your ideas on how we get academia to care about the things that are going to make science successful?
This is a big issue. I mean, this kind of so one thing that we're doing in ASAP that we're trying to is we're working within a group called the Open Research Funders Group, which is then leading a consortium of university presidents and vice provosts of research to actually try to get universities to understand the importance of this and to change aspects of their tenure and promotion committees and to actually value this at all. I mean, your point is really real. I mean, people tell us, this doesn't matter for me. People who I work with don't care about seeing the DOIs on my CV of all the outputs that I've shared. And so we're increasingly seeing universities come on board with this, but it's been very slow, slower than I would like, of course. And it's kind of something where we're constantly, having to touch base with them. And so I think it's going to take a big concerted effort to get universities from the top levels of universities to start to promote this, and it then will trickle down to the researchers, and hopefully they start to see the benefits of this for their own kind of selfish purposes. Yeah, it's something that it's a huge challenge, I think, right now, and it is a problem that we're trying to work within the community, but it's a little maybe more slow going than we want. But it's something at least internally at ASAP are focused on intently. Yeah.
Can I do that? Oh, sure, go ahead.
Do you have any metrics to judge like different universities? Oh, this is a good university, and then you give points. So I think they need more carrots.
I don't know actually enough about what the potential metrics that may exist, but it's a good question. I can follow up and look into it. But I don't know actually. It would be good to actually have such a metric, because then you could point to what's working and what's not working, and who are the best actors in the field and who are the bad actors. Yeah, definitely.
So Paul, thanks for the question. I'm going to kind of challenge us as academics a little bit to kind of consider that of all the people doing, let's say, a graduate program, only a fraction will go on to run a lab, which means that the largest fraction will go out there and seek out jobs for which these ecosystems and doing this kind of work is actually going to be highly valuable. And I think we need to kind of frame it that way, and that might change the culture. So it's almost giving carrots right away by saying that doing these things allows you much more resilience in your future life as you go out there. So I think that's how I would approach this, as opposed to, now, various universities are changing their culture around PTOs as well, but that's a slow process. You still have to satisfy a whole bunch of things before they look at your open data contributions or your GitHub contributions or your open science contributions. That being said, I think a way this ecosystem builds is through the people, the larger numbers of people, and those people will benefit from contributing and participating in this open ecosystem. And if you can convince them that that's their pathways, that everybody dreams of a specific pathway or a pathway, but I know of many, and this was more true in the engineering spaces that I have lived at, where it's very clear that they're not necessarily interested in becoming. They're like, I'm here to learn, I'm here to gain some skills, and I'm going to contribute in a different way. I think the biomedical sciences needs a little bit of that thought process to go towards.
I was just going to reiterate a point that you made in your talk. Yes, carrots and sticks are important, but like a big carrot is just if the tools were better, right? You know, people, I think many of us are ideologically aligned, right? If reproducibility and provenance was like a magic button that you could step on, we would all step on it. But right now, it's a lot of different buttons you have to step on in a very complicated order. So I made a dancing analogy, anyway.
Any more questions? Let's see. We're almost on time. We're about 2 minutes shy of 4 o'clock, that Nima said. So I want to thank the panel for being here. And thank you all for being here. And thanks to our various sponsors for getting us here in various ways. And please, I know Kendall sent out a survey. So I'm going to say, please complete the survey, give us feedback. And we would love to hear from you. What could we do next time that is better? So reach out to us. Think of us as a lab in this ecosystem. We are here to figure out how to fix this challenge. And as a lab, let's figure out what we can do, whether it's tools, technologies, or changing culture that we need to do. So thank you, everyone. And I believe people can still hang around till 4:30 or so outside. Hopefully there's a little bit more time for networking. And see you at the next Odin.